Well, good morning. Last night I was making a video and I thought I'd finish the intro this morning. Today's topics include the changing face of customer service, or how launching this YouTube channel reminded me of those early missile launches. And I thought we'd take a look at a couple of real-world examples of customer service. One has to do with an ongoing issue I've got with eBay telling me I have a policy violation. Their AI is pulling up a listing and saying it has a policy violation. And my attempts to get that resolved, unsuccessfully so far, by the way. Something that's going on with one of my buyers, because one of the questions if you run an eBay business or sell on any platform is what kind of approach you're going to take to customer service when your customer has an issue. Sometimes I'm the customer, sometimes I'm the seller. Well, in this issue, a gentleman bought a 1,000 count bag of vintage electronic repair parts, little tiny things, but the listing has several photos, including a zoomable close-up, so he could have, if he'd have looked, I don't know if he did, he would have seen what shape and type they were. I shipped it out a few days ago. He comes back after receiving it. He says he can't use those parts. I misled him in my description, or I wasn't accurate in my description in the listing. And of course I disagree with that, because I gave him a close-up zoomable photo. I kept my description pretty generic, and I said, look at the pictures. So you get these. And often, depending on the way the text is worded, you get the feeling they're trying to get a discount. They want a refund, but instead they'll accept a discount. And you have to decide for yourself, and I do in each situation on a one-on-one basis, whether I'm willing to give that discount. And generally I don't. I say, put it in the packaging, I send it back, and I'll give you your money back minus the shipping. That's what they're trying to avoid, is they're trying to avoid paying the return shipping. So I'm not a believer in the customer is always right. If I don't feel I made a mistake or misled anyone in the description, I think it's a customer issue. You know, they looked at it, they should have determined if the part was what they needed before they ever ordered it. Once they get it, and he says, I took a closer look. Well, that implies he didn't look well enough to begin with. And then he says, your description wasn't accurate, and I disagree with that. So I went back to him last night. I said, yeah, send it back and I'll give you a refund. So this morning the message is, well, how about you just give me a discount and we avoid the shipping? But we'll see how this one plays out. And I'll show you the one where I'm the customer for this heater and go through that. That's been going on for months and months. And it's one of the issues I have with AI, because as you talk about the changing face of customer service, it's not always a face anymore. You know, it's a robot, it's an AI, it's a software program. And it's programmed to go down a series of actions based on what you type. And it can't understand subtlety, and it often is wrong. So I would definitely say customer service, at least for eBay, has declined. Customer service for this email provider has definitely also declined. You have to decide for yourself what kind of customer service you want to provide. But at a minimum, answer the messages, answer them promptly. And if you have some options that you're willing to consider, let the buyer know. There's nothing wrong with letting them pick from the choices you're willing to offer. Yeah, those early Tomahawk cruise missile launches from the submarine platform I was on, my job, once we surfaced, was typically to go topside and meet the dive boat that was coming alongside to hang the camera on the hull behind the torpedo tube to watch the launch. And then I'd be in charge of the group of sailors helping the technicians come aboard, the engineers. Because the interesting thing was that, there's not a lot of space on submarines. So if you're going to take 15, 20 new warm bodies coming off a torpedo retriever, they've got to kind of walk the plank, and you've got to synchronize the rise and fall of the submarine and the small torpedo retriever, and you've got to start the people across the plank so that they arrive just as the two come together. And then they've always got briefcases and equipment and electronics for monitoring. So we'd take these guys aboard, and in return, because all we were doing is, we had a square box on a navigation chart, and that was our launch window. and we would be basically cruising that submarine around in circles, coming into that launch box once an hour, or whatever the rotation was, waiting for everything to be in alignment, pull that trigger and shoot that missile. But because we were taking people aboard, crew members who weren't needed for cruising around in a circle were put ashore. And I'd do my guys in rotation. So each time we were to do one of these missile shoots, I'd pick a guy who hadn't been put ashore, and they'd get their turn. And I remember taking my turn a couple of times. And the first time it was a beautiful sunny day, hot, off the coast of California. As typically would happen, there'd be delays. Either a chase plane needed fuel, or a Russian a fishing trawler would be in the area, and around the submarine would go again, being back in that box. Well, we're up there with our shirts off playing frisbee, having a box lunch. And when I returned to San Diego a few days later, Rose was a little skeptical about my story about where I got the suntan. Yeah, I'd been sunburned as a ginger. I always burned. Of course, the next time it was my turn to go ashore, completely opposite. Late in the year, windy, blustery, cold, damp. We're huddled around a barrel outside of the operations center on the island, burning wood, trying to stay warm and keep our fingers nimble. It felt like an old, street corner band, and you see in the old movies, harmonizing, but two completely different experiences. And when I started thinking about all the steps necessary to get this video filmed and this channel started, it made me think of the old checklists that we'd go through, and you'd start over, just as you'd restart this camera when something really goes badly, like somebody lights a chainsaw off next door or something. I'm out on the deck this afternoon, just got back from making a couple of auction pickups. In fact, the items are still in the truck. Once it cools down a little bit, it's a hot day today, I'll go ahead and back the truck up to the tables and do a little unloading, maybe a little filming. I'm not sure what time of day that'll be, because I may see the guy come for another load of firewood today. He's been coming every day, every other day. He doesn't have a large truck, so he's been eating that elephant one truckload, or about half a cord at a time, since we agreed to sell it to him. But while I was over at the auction today, one of the staffers, who's ex-Army, asked me whether I'd noticed that the Navy was firing Tomahawk missiles again. He knows I spent about a decade in the submarine force. Coincidentally, just yesterday, I jotted down a note in my new notebook where I'm keeping ideas for future videos relating to how that era, getting those missiles to launch from a submerged submarine, reminded me of launching this new YouTube channel. Yeah, you're probably thinking, Hank, where the hell do those two intersect? But it has to do with, as a rookie sitting down here to film, it's like I've got this whole mental checklist. Have I freed up the space on the phone? Do I have the external microphone, which I've forgotten, by the way? Have I set it to horizontal filming? Do I have my selfies? So you've got all these things to check off before you turn the camera on and roll film. Well, that's kind of the way those early Tomahawk missile launches were. We were on the hook, so whatever General Dynamics, the people who designed the Tomahawk, it's a cruise missile. Whenever they had one ready to test on the West Coast, we'd put to sea with that missile. And basically our trip lasted as long as it needed to get that missile out the tubes. And of course those early ones were not spectacular. Sometimes all we could do in those early days is get them out of the tube, which was a torpedo tube in our case. And we had all these preparations to do. We'd go out to an offshore island off California that the Navy had for a firing range, and then we'd have to be in a box, a square box on the ocean, our launch location, and we'd circle through that box over and over, and all these other factors had to be in place. The weather had to be good. The chase planes, the jets that followed the missile in flight, had to be there. Couldn't be any Russian surveillance trawlers in the area to film what we were doing. So you had all these things, and if you couldn't put a check mark next to each one of them, you didn't fire the missile. And you made another loop through the ocean. We called it making holes in the ocean. And then once everything was finally synchronized and we launched, then our part of the job was done. And later we'd get to see footage on how the missile performed. But like I say, in those early days, just getting it out of the submarine was the initial challenge. And whenever we'd have a few tests that weren't going well, the folks from General Dynamics would show up and start handing out patches and coffee cups, and a few lucky guys would get jackets and blazoned with the information, kind of like the NASCAR drivers wear these days. And I think somewhere I've still got, along with my box of old Navy stuff, I've still got a Tomahawk patch that I used to wear, rose stitched it onto one of my underway jumpsuits. We called them poopy suits. They're like coveralls. Actually, what's on your mind? I mean, I've been trying to make videos and learn editing. It's been sporadic because I trying to integrate it with the rest of the routine and life this summer. So when I'm not listing or unpacking loads from auctions or attending online auctions to decide what to buy, I've been trying to fit in some video. A couple nights I've been up quite late because whenever you start a new project, it's exciting. Starting the YouTube channel falls into that category. One day I actually got 2 of them done on the same day. So I think I'm up to about, the next one will be number 10, though I'm not sure where this one will fit in. But I found it an interesting coincidence that the same day I'm writing notes about cruise missiles in my new logbook, the Navy's in the news shooting off cruise missiles. I probably should show you that logbook at some point. I've basically taken a 3-ring binder, and in the front I've given a page to each of the videos so I can start recording the information, what the topic was, what the title was, what date it was produced, the high points of the video. And then in the back I've given myself another section so I can write down thoughts that come to me any time of day on what might make a good title or what might make a good video itself, topic. And I've already filled up 7-8 pages of things that I think would make good videos. But again, if you've got something on your mind, or if I show something that you have an alternative for, or a better idea, please let me know. I've added a new email to the YouTube page, so if you want to send along a photo or something a little longer, sometimes the comment section a little too brief, so you can't really get into a subject. But on the email you can, and those will come to me on a new Gmail account. Yeah, I also had to change my personal email this week. After 28 years of using the same local company, or what started as a local company, I've now discontinued their service because of a recent problem. When I first came back to the area in 1997, we were living in Italy, but we came back here to Washington, and I looked around this community, and the local talent was working out of basically a converted house in the old town of Silverdale, and he called himself Denobi. That was the extension. This was about the era of America Online, or America Inline as we used to call it. Dial-up was still prevalent. You actually heard the dial tones. A lot of the computers were still running floppy disks. So to do the setup, I took that desktop computer, I carried it into his place in Silverdale, set it on the counter, he hooked it up, and he did the install that allowed me to get emails into my inbox. And for the next few years, if there was ever an issue, like a port had to be changed or a setting had to be changed, if he couldn't tell me over the phone, I'd carry the computer in, set it on the counter, he'd resolve the issue. Well, like that old country song about selling off your one-man shop to Microsoft, he sold his company to a larger internet provider, or an internet email service company. And a few years after that, it got sold out again. Well, it's currently, it exists as part of the SiteStar umbrella, and SiteStar is a big nationwide company. And a couple years ago, when I had a similar problem, I called their local office out on Bainbridge Island. The staff called me right back. They went through the settings, talked about security updates, passwords, ports to connect to, and over the phone they resolved the issue. Because over the first 25 years of this relationship, they answered when you called and they helped you work through your problem. Well, now when we called, because we had a similar problem, a couple days ago we stopped getting emails in my inbox. My Gmail account still worked, but this Denobi account, it had stayed Denobi. And all the changes of buyouts and company name changes, they just kept putting in a patch so that my original email address that was on my business cards and on my website back in the day simply got forwarded and through their system. So even though Denobi itself hadn't existed in over 20 years, my emails still came to Denobi. So we called them and we said, hey, we've stopped getting the emails. They ran a few tests with Rose. She was in the house on her laptop. They said, no, problem's not at our end. You're going to have to go talk to the Mac people, the Apple people. And I said, over all the 28 years I've been using your company, that solution's never worked. They simply turn around and tell you to go back to your internet people, back to your email people and resolve it because it's not the Mac, it's not the laptop. So there's a lot of finger pointing, it's not our problem. So this time I finally had enough of it, because the only reason we'd kept that account around was to avoid having to go to every place that email's been on file for 28 years and change it. It's like losing your credit card or having your credit card hacked. And you've got to think about all the places that, direct deposits, automatic bill paying, your county trash pickup, online auctions, buying on Amazon, all those places that credit card's on file. Well, it's the same way with your email address. All those places in 28 years, that email was the reference for contact. Rose's mom passed away this couple of years ago. Rose's mom had the same phone number at that house, landline, since I had begun dating her. So all the numbers in my life that have changed, and in Rose's life too, over the decade, that phone number had remained constant. And continuity like that is important. It's one of the reasons you find a mechanic you like, or you find a handyman you like, or a computer repair guy you like, whatever it is, a hairstylist. And even if you move further away, or they raise their prices, or maybe you've got to wait a little longer to get serviced, you stick with them because you've developed that relationship. And it's the kind of relationship I want to develop with YouTube. So it's why I posted an email so that you guys can contact us. So finally I said, let me talk to your supervisor, because the guy's like, oh, you can always log into the web and get your web mail. And it's like, I've been paying you for 28 years to have you put emails in my inbox on my last job. And the fact that you're saying I can do something else, I don't want to. I want to keep paying you to get emails in my inbox. It's that simple. If you can't resolve this and tell me what to do to fix it, I don't know why I would keep paying you. So I scrapped him. I told him, I says, we're going to kill the account. We're going to cancel it. I'm going to just create a couple of Gmail accounts, and we'll go that route, because I don't think I've ever heard of anybody saying my Gmail was never delivered, or my Gmail was updated and now my computer won't get emails. Maybe the whole thing is just we've become a bit spoiled with connectivity. I used to go onto that submarine, and for weeks or months on end, I didn't have connectivity with anybody. We wrote letters. Indeed, in fact, Rose had to start writing a sequential number in the corner, so that when I would get mail call, I would know which letters had been written first, because they'd arrive to me. We'd pull in somewhere and I might get letters 7, 9, 13, and 17. And who knows where the rest of them went to. They might not actually be delivered until the boat returns back to port, because the mail is sent where we're supposed to be, but a submarine schedule is very clandestine in that respect. So if your mail is sent where you're expected to be, but you go somewhere else, the letters don't arrive and they get forwarded. So you're in this process of being forwarded, which is what I'm finding out as I go out to all these auction companies that I use to change my registration profile to my new email. Some are highly secure, some are not. Some of them, it's like strike over the old email, type in a new email, hit save. Some of them, we're going to send you a link. And of course, the funny thing is they want to send the link to your last email, which you're not getting messages from, and it's the reason you want a new email to begin with. Some have an alternate, and at least one of them, the alternate was the house phone, because we still have a landline. It says, we'll send a text to your phone number. It's like, it doesn't get text. So yeah, all these companies, sometimes they don't think through the processes they have in place are not logical for the situations their customers find themselves in. And I got at least one that put me in a loop. It says, I want to edit my email. So it sends me back a code. I did get the code. I put the code in. It takes me right back to the, I want to change my email, so it sends me to the place to send another code. And you can't get out of that loop. It's like a phone tree that, press 1 for customer service. And you can never get to the desk you want to talk to. And answering phones, no. Sometimes I've heard the problem exists, especially for some of these smaller sites. eBay and their customer service has declined in that respect terribly in the 20-odd years we've been using it. It used to be you called a phone number, you got put on hold. A few minutes later, they answered and could usually take care of the problem that caused you to call in the first place. Now you got to go through this whole, is it a seller issue? Is it a buyer issue? Is it a payment issue? And you click on the one that applies, and it either doesn't take you anywhere, it takes you to a bank of questions, or commonly asked questions that you might find an answer in. Or it shunts you over to the AI, and you start getting a little typed message that says, "Hi, what's this about? Can we help you?" And you end up starting to type, "I want to talk to a human. I want to speak to a human. Human. I want human." And after doing that 4 or 5 times, it says, "Would you like to talk to a representative?" And you're like, it's the whole purpose I called was to talk to a representative. And then typically you end up having to call, even on a minor issue, you end up having to call 2-3 times to fully resolve the issue. I've got one right now that I called 3 times and now I've stopped, but the issue's never been resolved. It said I had a policy violation. Okay, it happens from time to time. You've been doing this long enough. Well, this one said the outside covering of a space heater that I had parted it out a couple years ago, sold most of the parts. I used a stock listing, kept changing the actual part, and then put them up as a bunch of multiple listings. Well, I'm down to about the last part, which was the least likely to ever sell anyway. It's the outer metal cover. But it tells me that I have a listing description policy violation. Not an item specific, not a title, not a Vero. There's something wrong with the description. And the only time I've ever heard of that actually happening is if you try to put an external link in there and it doesn't want to link you to another website or an email address or something. Say, no, it was one of about a dozen or more listings, all for the same model, all for the same part, all written the same way, but it's flagged this one. And I'm not sure why. There was some category changing, and sometimes that's what causes the problem. If the item you had listed was, say, a car part, and it was in the electrical lighting category, and they moved that over to a subcategory, sometimes in the changeover, your listing gets flagged because it was fine before. Now it's got a problem because of something they did. So I called them up and I said, I can't understand why this is being flagged. It says my listing is being hidden until I resolve this issue. Please take a look at it and tell me what the issue is. They couldn't tell me what the issue was. They called over a coworker. They couldn't tell me what the issue was. Nobody could actually identify what the issue was. So the assumption is the AI flagged it. It's like, okay, how do we move forward? And they're like, we don't know. All right, can you move it into my unsolds so that I can make a new draft? Or I can make I can update it. No, can't do that. So she says, she gave me a couple of suggestions and I tried them. But every time I try to open the listing to update it, it would act like it did, but it would actually not do the update or make the listing visible. And I said, okay, how about we just kill the listing completely, we take it down, I start over, I take new pictures. She's like, that's a good idea. Okay, make the note on my hub page that says you have a policy violation, make that go away. Make the listing go away, make the action go away. It's history. Nope. Been that way for 3-4 months now. They're always like, well, we'll send a memo, an action request to technical support, and they'll get all over that. I still have it there every morning. So I have to open it routinely to make sure that it's the same old existing policy violation and not a new policy violation. Because ever since they made the AI or gave the AI the authority or permission to take down listings when it perceives a policy violation, the number of policy violations has certainly increased. I was lucky if I'd get one a year or one every other year in the old days. Now I think I've had 4 since January, and only one of them I would say was actually valid, and it had to do with light bulbs of all things. The federal government decided that it wanted to force the elimination of incandescent light bulbs, your regular run-of-the-mill filament light bulb. It wants to force everybody over to using more modern, more efficient light bulbs. So instead of going to the manufacturers and putting a moratorium on them and saying, you've got to have these incandescent bulbs, stop running off the factory assembly line on this date, instead they're going out to the places like eBay and saying, don't let people resell new old stock, which seems to be almost absolutely the opposite of mandating something for efficiency, because now all the materials and all the time and all the labor that went into producing those when they were allowed is now being wasted. They're being told, don't run through the inventory and replace them with new bulbs. They're saying you can't resell those bulbs on eBay and other sites like it. That's why you may or may not have noticed, if you prefer or need a particular old incandescent light for a fixture in your house, they're getting harder and harder to come by as you go into the stores, the Walmarts, the Targets, Home Depots, and almost everything now has a modern equivalent, an LED or a halogen. It's one of those situations where you have to know whether the replacement light bulb pack you have and want to list on eBay falls into the category of allowed or not allowed. And normally when you go to these policies, there's page after page of gobbledygook. And when you're done, you're just as confused as when you started. You don't know whether the item you have does or doesn't comply or not. So sadly, what ends up happening is people take down all their items in that category and discard them or donate them or waste them. Because if you think when the federal government wants to mandate something, go to the manufacturing source. Drive that home that way. They have all the carrot and stick methods they need. Why go to the secondary market and say these perfectly fine bulbs that support perfectly fine light fixtures are no longer perfectly fine? That kind of mentality drives me crazy as a maintenance guy, because it just gets complex. What if what I'm trying to run is a movie projector from 1946? Has anybody produced an LED or halogen replacement light that fits into the socket? Or even my house lamps, my ceiling lamps. So now I have to start removing the light fixtures from my house because the government has said I have to use modern light bulbs and there aren't any that fit in those fixtures. Which brings me to the point. I didn't mean to run on about it this way, but customer service. Yeah, well, after 28 years, they're no longer going to be providing my customer service because their technicians now work remotely. That was what their manager said. I said, can I talk to the people locally on Bainbridge Island? He's like, oh, my system doesn't allow for that. You have to talk to the next available technician wherever they happen to be. Why was it that the people who used to be local could fix local problems, but now you've moved on? Makes me, if I want to put on my conical conspiracy hat, makes me wonder if somebody in management decided that keeping those patches alive for the companies they absorbed 30 years ago, 25 years ago, is costing too much. So whenever somebody from one of those patches calls in, we're just going to force them to either modernize, change, rent our new services, or move on elsewhere because we don't care anymore. It's kind of the way I feel about eBay. eBay's always been a kind of a love-hate relationship. And I never want to come across like I'm bashing eBay. It's a wonderful platform in that it allows me to sell things sitting at my house to people around the world and get a reasonable return for my investment in time and money. It's allowed me to do something I never could when I first retired and started. Selling small, used, or new things online. It comes with issues. Things they do because it improves their standing with their shareholders. Things they do because it increases their bottom line. Things they do to try to standardize their platform. which they're not very good at all. In fact, one of the items written in the back of my notebook is the 12 things that annoy me most about eBay on a daily basis. Now, I'm not talking about the big things like when they lose a few 100,000 photos and mess up your listings, though I had one of those this week. I'm just talking about the daily small things that irritate you as a user on the platform. You go looking for something that's always been in a certain place, it's been moved. They're constantly redesigning their screens to grab more attention, titillate buyers. It's just, yeah. So anyway, one of the topics is the 12 things I find most annoying about eBay on a daily basis. I'll get to that one shortly. That one will take a little more experience with screen saving because I'll want to actually show you on the screen what I'm talking about. Yeah, their constant need to change their common pages and make update is one of the most maddening things about eBay because it slows us down as sellers. Conformity, uniformity, those are the things that make reusing. If I want to list, I don't want to have to keep looking for where did you hide the Easter egg? The screen has moved. Yeah, some changes are good, but their constant need to rearrange and reimagine themselves is a frustrating act. And it's like the software people see that as an invitation to show off. Oh, let's scrap that last guy's work and let me show my boss what I can do. It makes you want to have a stern conversation with software people about how their changes affect their users. Anyway, this is Brian. You're watching Cabin Fever Reselling.